It is just past 9 o'clock on this Thursday morning. You're listening to Community Radio KGNU. And this morning we're going to have a conversation about Article V of the Constitution. Article 5, it's the Roman numeric V, 5. So you can see it printed as Article V. We're going to refer to it as Article 5. And it's a way of actually amending the Constitution, but it's never actually been used to amend the Constitution. However, there is a growing movement that would like to see this implemented. It's quite complicated, but we have three guests who are in favour of this, and we're going to talk about it. But we're also going to present some perspectives of folks who don't want this particular thing to be triggered. I'll introduce our guests first of all. We have Bill Walker joining us by telephone. Bill is the founder of a group, Friends of Article V. That's FOAVC.org, and he joins us by phone. Also joining us by phone is Dan Marks, who runs a Facebook group, Article 5. ArticleV.org is his website. I'd like to welcome Dan and Bill. Thank you very much for joining us on KGNU.
Thank you. How are you there this morning?
And joining us in the studio is Evan Ravitz, who's a local activist who's been working for many years around direct democracy. Folks in Boulder might remember Evan as being the tightrope walker from the Pearl Street Mall, but today we're going to talk about his work and advocacy around direct democracy. He joins us also in the studio. Good morning, Evan.
Good morning.
Well, let's talk about exactly what Article 5 is. You have some text there. This is the official text, and then we'll explain what it is.
Yeah. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. The rest is a little more complicated, but basically it then says that whatever the convention proposes must be ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states, or, and this is Congress's choice, by conventions, 3/4 of state conventions. I'll leave out the rest.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but I do want to put out there that there's quite a lot of opposition to this. And back in April, more than 200 organizations signed a letter saying that they were opposed to calling for a new constitutional convention under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, saying that it's a threat to America's constitutional rights and civil liberties and could be opening the door to organizations like ALEC, meeting right now in Denver, and other organizations to co-opt our democracy. And some of the groups that signed that include Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, Center for Popular Democracy, Center for Media and Democracy, the ACLU, a whole bunch of other organizations there signed that letter. However, my three guests today say, I'd like to paraphrase this, on the contrary, this could be a boon for regular people to have their voices heard. Evan Ravitz, first of all, why do you see Article 5 as being beneficial for the general public?
Well, Jefferson said we should have a constitutional convention every 19 years because he also said that the people of each generation deserve the government that they want. And now we're stuck with something that's kind of obsolete, certainly by Jefferson's standards. And by the way, it's not really a constitutional convention. It's, as the Constitution says, a convention to propose amendments, so not rewriting the whole thing. There are plenty of, quote, liberal organizations that have proposed amendments, most prominently Wolfpack, which wants an end to Citizens United and corporate citizenship. And I feel that Common Cause, League of Women Voters, are basically fearful people who assume the worst. But as Bill Walker, who's on with us, has explained, going back 200 years, there have been over 500 requests for a convention, and none of them have requested to remove any of our rights. The only things that various states have requested to remove are prohibition and the income tax. So no one has proposed removing the First Amendment or all the other things that you're focusing, I'm afraid.
Well, the League of Women Voters or Common Cause, neither of them are with us today, so we can't get them to state their particular position. But I do have a copy of that letter that they are signatories to, and we'll put a link to that as well as links to all of the groups that we're talking about today at kgnu.org. And we'd like to go to Bill Walker because you have a website, FOAVC, which is a friend of Article 5 or V of the convention. What is your position on this? Why do you think this would be something that would be beneficial for everybody?
Well, first of all, let's get a couple of things clarified here. The Constitution does not give an option. It requires Congress call. That's been in effect since 1910 when the states first satisfied it. They satisfied it 11 times since. So these people that say they oppose it, they're basically saying, let's just not obey the Constitution. It's just that simple and that plain. As to the political benefits, I believe that it would help clear the air on a lot of issues and subjects that have built up a lot of procedures and so on and so forth that would be reviewed by the American people. They would have the chance to specifically elect delegates to the convention with the idea of looking at the operational side of this document. The idea of rights and so on and so forth being repealed, as Evan has indicated, is just ludicrous. The states have not applied for it, and they certainly wouldn't get it. And if you want to check that, just go into any room of, say, 400 or 500 people and ask them how many would actually veto the First Amendment. You're just not going to get the support to do it. But getting back to this thing about opposition to this convention, that is what they are actually saying, because Congress is mandated to call. And the reason that they have never called is not because the states have not applied, is not because they don't understand the Constitution, but they have absolutely no procedure in place to actually issue the call. And that is what Evan, myself, and Dan have been working on with Congressman Pullitz to help set up bicameral rules. Now, the congressman issued a public statement, and I'd just like to read it exactly as he's issued it, which pretty well just says the whole thing. It says, when any community member contacts my congressional office attempting to navigate and understand the federal government system, I make every attempt to be responsive. Per my constituent's request, which was Evan, I have contacted the parliamentarian of the House of Representatives to provide clarification about Congress's obligations and authority under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. As a member of the House Rules Committee, understanding procedural issues are critical to me to be an effective member of that committee. Based on a conversation with the parliamentarian, it is clear that no formal process exists for either chamber of Congress to officially count applications passed by the states, said Pullitz. I believe that citizens should have access to all levels of government, from local school board all the way up to the President of the United States. As a member of Congress, I have a duty to help my community members understand the legislative process, unquote. So the requirement that is holding this whole thing up is the fact that there is no process in Congress to formally count the applications and issue the convention calls. So it's not a question of if there's going to be a convention, but when. And it's not a question of whether these rules exist. It is a question of exactly their content. Because under the rules of Congress, and I'm going to again just read the actual statement, the 29th rule of the House of Representatives, but there's a similar rule in the Senate, states, the provisions of law that constituted the rules of the House at the end of the previous Congress shall govern the House in all cases to which they are applicable. And the rules of parliamentary practice comprised by Jefferson's Manual shall govern the House in all cases to which they are applicable and in which they are not inconsistent with the rules and orders of the House. Putting that in plain English, if there isn't a rule in the House, Jefferson's Manual is the ruling standard. It's in both houses. Section 387 of Jefferson's Manual states, where the Constitution authorizes each House to determine the rules of its proceedings, it must mean in those cases, legislative, executive, or judiciary, submitted to them by the Constitution or in something related to these and necessary toward their execution. In other words, the Constitution has submitted that to Congress. It has to do it. and there must be rules for the necessary to execution. Hence, we are working on getting bicameral rules in the United States Congress to call the necessary to do the necessary counts of the conventions that have been applied for by the state, which at present number at 11. You can read the applications, the actual text of the applications on the FOABC website. We do summarize them up and show the 11 groupings. We have not mentioned the bicameral rules yet because we are basically still in the process of getting everything formulated and specified and so on and so forth. But this is actually the first public announcement of these activities that we're making. So you've got yourself a historic scoop.
Well, let's Bill Walker. He runs the website Friends of the Article 5 Convention. That's the new Roman numeral, so it's V, and the website is foavc.org. We'll link to that at kgnu.org. Also joining us in studio is Evan Ravitz, who's been working for many years locally around direct democracy, and we have on the phone Dan Marks, who runs the website articlev.org, and also a Facebook group, Article V, Article 5. And we're talking about the Article 5 Convention. It is rather complex, but we are talking about some of these issues this morning. Evan, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, Dan, I'm sorry. Bill, I think, is getting a little ahead of the audience. When he says that there's 11 sets of applications, what he means is that starting about 100 years ago, the necessary required two-thirds of states had applied for a convention way back a century ago, and since then 10 more times they've come up with the two-thirds necessary. But I hope we're not going to have 11 conventions. And when he says we need bicameral rules, what this means is in the Constitution most duties are assigned to the House or to the Senate. But in Article V, it says the Congress shall call the convention. And there are no joint or bicameral rules yet for that situation.
So just to remind listeners that under Article V, under Article 5, basically a majority of state legislatures would need to call for a convention. Two-thirds.
Of the states.
What we have right now are how many? 27 states?
No. No, we have 49 states that have asked.
There are 49 states right now.
Correct. The only state that's not ever applied is the state of Hawaii. No, there's no 27. There is no subject. Article 5, and you read it, does not aggregate according to subject. There is no discretion on Congress. Nothing. It is a numeric count of applying states, period. And the reason that is designed by the Convention of 1787, was that so Congress could not refuse to call a convention when the states apply. The best analogy I can use to give an idea of what it is think of it like a letter in an envelope. The states send in the envelope to Congress. They got their name on it. It says Article 5 application. Congress looks at the envelope. When they got 34 from 34 states, they got a call. They then send the letter, which is what the states want to discuss, over to the convention. The convention is the one that's doing it, because these applications saying we want a convention to deal with this. So Congress doesn't make the choice. If it makes the choice, then it is making the proposal, and that's not what the conventions are asking for. Excuse me, the states.
That's not what the states are asking. As I mentioned earlier, there are quite a few organizations that are opposed to this, and a letter was signed in April by more than 200 organizations, including Common Cause, League of Women Voters, Emily's Voice, a whole slew of organizations, environmental groups, a lot of what they would self-identify as progressive groups. And their concern is that this is opening up the door to organizations like ALEC, like the Koch brothers, that are already influencing state politics, that are already pouring billions of dollars in to influence our political system. Given that Article 5 has never been used before, it's rather uncharted territory. Evan, are you not concerned at all that we could have this system co-opted by corporations and by the billionaires that are already seeking to influence our politics?
I suppose there's a tiny chance, but they've already completely infiltrated all branches of our existing government. And like Bill says, this isn't our choice. It is as clear as anything ever written legally, and it's in the Constitution. It trumps anything else. 200 organizations, federal laws, it's the Constitution. When the states want it, they get it. So, instead of denying this and organizing against the inevitable, because it's just a matter of when, we need to organize to send our delegates to the convention so that we get the things that we want. And I think that liberal people will learn something from conservative people who do have some good ideas. And it should be done by the people, because the politicians are pretty much corrupted by now.
Well, I'd like to invite Dan Marks to weigh in on the conversation. Dan Marks has a website, articlev.org. He also runs a Facebook page of the same name. Dan, what about those concerns that I laid out, that many organizations, and I read op-eds about this and other editorials, people concerned that triggering Article V or calling for a convention is opening up the door even further to the billionaires and the organizations that are already influencing politics but could now go in and really influence our Constitution?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me on your program. It's an honor to speak to everybody out there in Boulder. I used to live there quite a long time ago at 4th and Arapahoe, so hey, everybody out there. The convention, it's true that basically the only limitation for the convention is that we can't infringe upon the equal suffrage of the states in the Senate. That's it. Everything else is on the table. We could create a presidential council instead of a president. We could get rid of the House of Representatives and have direct democracy. We could have significant change to our system of government. And change is always scary because you don't know what you're going to get. And so if people are always disposed to endure any kind of oppression or suffering because we don't know what's in store for us. However, when we figure that we get all these people together, average Americans, to talk about these issues, we all come to some pretty strong agreement, when we're not being heavily influenced by the parties. And just as much as we would fear the influence of the Koch brothers and ALEC and other entities out there, I am no fan of the Democrats. I despise the GOP, and I personally would like to see something much more nonpartisan happen, and it's really up to us and our participation in this to direct it. And keep in mind that whatever the convention approves of, just like Congress, it would still have to be ratified by 38 states, which means that really we only need 13 states to veto any proposal. And right now the GOP has a significant advantage in state legislatures across the country, with the number of state legislatures in control of both houses. But even with that record support that they have, they're still 5 states short of having any kind of blank check on the Constitution. So I'm not concerned about what proposals might come out that people don't like, because if there was a proposal that says, let's get rid of the Second Amendment, you better believe that there's going to be people all across the country surrounding state houses making sure that state legislature or ratification convention doesn't ratify that amendment. Same goes for the right. If they want to propose an amendment that creates English as a national language, there's going to be heavy opposition. Any amendment to the Constitution is going to require significant unanimity from both sides. And again, hopefully we don't see a partisan assembly and it becomes a divided group. Hopefully we can work together.
Well, I'd like to add a couple of quick points on what Mark said to clarify a couple of things. First of all, the convention is the same situation as Congress. It's going to take 2/3 of the state delegations to propose it. Now, everybody is worried about what a convention will do, and yet they ignore the fact that Congress can do the same exact thing any day of the week it chooses, and it's in session all the time. So any fears that they've got that a convention could do it, they seem to have no fear about the fact that Congress can do the exact same thing any day. That's the first thing. Second of all, you're not going to have a homogenous group that's going to come into Congress or come into this convention. It's going to be made up of elected delegates. They're going to have different positions, so on and so forth. And as Dan has pointed out, when you actually analyze the figures, both sides are well below the support necessary to even get it out of a convention, to get any proposed amendment out of a convention. Then you've got to go to the 75% required in the United States to get it proposed. Doesn't matter if it goes to the state legislatures or to state conventions. In other words, the opposition to any amendment can lose 1/3 of its support in a convention and still prevail. How effective can they be? All they need is 13 people in 13 state legislatures in one house to vote no. And that's it. Because if those 13 people control that house, if they're house leaders, and that's it, the amendment's done. It's not going to happen. And it's not going to be reconsidered. It's not going to be reintroduced. It's got to go through the whole process again. In other words, it's literally a consent of the minority as it's established in Article 5. It is not a decision of the majority. It actually is a consent of the minority. So as far as doing all these things that people fear and say they're going to happen and so on and so forth, fine. When you put the pedal to the metal, you're going to have to go up there and you're going to have to get 2/3 support. So let them ask this. Do they have the massive public crying for this that they're feared? Can they show email letters? Do they show protests and so at Congress and so on and so forth? If they show that, then maybe they got a valid point. But I haven't seen anybody screaming and yelling, even in the liberal side, to say, let's get rid of the Second Amendment and make it so that nobody can carry weapons in this country. It just isn't there. Maybe there's a few.
I just want to remind our listeners what we're talking about this morning and identify our guests. That was Bill Walker, and he runs the website Friends of the Article 5 Convention. That's FOAVC.org. Also joining us by phone is Dan Mark. His website is articlevv.org, and V being the Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. And we're talking about how that could be triggered, and so how the U.S. Constitution could, in fact, be amended. Joining us in the studio, we have Evan Ravitz, a long-time local activist around direct democracy, and it's a very complicated subject. So we'll have links to all of these articles at our website and all of these websites at KGNU.org as well. But Evan, you said that you see this as an avenue for regular people to have their voice heard in politics when we're seeing money being poured into our political system that is outweighing that regular voice. How can people, though, do this? What would be the next pathway? What's the next step in this? And what would be the pathway forward for people who do want to get involved?
Well, I think the best thing you can do is to join our Facebook group, Article V. But what happens next, it depends on the parliamentarian of the House and the parliamentarian of the Senate helping us come up with bicameral or joint rules for how Congress counts the applications and calls the convention. But I wanted to say a little bit about direct democracy. That's really what I've been working on for 28 years. I see this convention to propose amendments, not really a constitutional convention, as being the ultimate form of direct democracy, where the people are rewiring the old Constitution to bring it up to date and, make it more fair. And fortunately, the three of us and Jared Polis all favor some kind of direct democracy as an amendment to the Constitution. I and Jared see it as just ballot initiatives on a national level, just like we have in Colorado, and it's made our state so popular and successful.
Well, it did until Amendment 71 was passed, so it's now harder to actually amend the state constitution here in Colorado.
True.
And just as a point of reference, that is already on the convention agenda from an application from Wisconsin since 1929.
Wow. And personally, I don't want to get rid of Congress. I think we should have more checks and balances. And I don't think the American people want to vote on renaming every post office and every Memorial Day and everything. We want to set the basic direction of the country and let Congress carry out the details. And this leaves Congress free on the occasion that it might happen for real leadership to come up when the people, the majority, are wrong, and we need articulate voices in the Congress to explain why. And so I see it as adding direct democracy to the Constitution, not removing Congress or anything else. But these are all details. First, we have to get bicameral rules and have a convention, and then may the best ideas win.
Well, as I said, there's a lot in this, and so we will put more information at our website and links to these websites that we're talking about as well. But we just have 2 minutes left, and so I'd like to give everyone just a final word. Bill Walker, what are your final words to our listeners who are maybe concerned because maybe they have heard the coverage about the various different groups, a lot of them very progressive groups who are concerned and who oppose calling for an Article 5 constitutional convention? And for people who are just concerned about our democracy, given the uncharted political waters we're in right now, what are your final words right now? Bill Walker.
I would say that when you have questions about it to these groups, such as Convention of States, Compact for America, anything, ask them for their references. If they cannot provide the references for what they state, then accept the fact that they are just simply giving political rhetoric. If you want to read the references, the federal laws, court rulings, so on and so forth, the only place you're going to find it is at foabc.org. We provide and base all our information on public record. And you are right, it is a complex and long and detailed site. It's not made for somebody who wants 30-second reading. But it does give you the actual facts of public record, and you will find them to be totally correct, and you will find that nobody else has given you the correct information.
Well, we will link to your website. That's Bill Walker, foavc.org. Dan Marks, you also have a website, articlev.org. Your final word.
I just want to make sure that we underscore the true news here that, for years we've tried to figure out why Congress has not called this convention. Many scholars assume that it's because states weren't applying right. The real reason has been discovered that the reason Congress hasn't reacted to any of these state applications for over 200 years is because they never created the mechanism. And we're going to resolve that and fix that. And now it's a foregone conclusion that those applications will be acknowledged and we will have a convention. And don't be afraid of it. Participate in it. They want you to run away from it. Run towards it. Thanks a lot for having me on.
That's Dan Marks. His website is articlev.org. Evan Rabbit.
One little thing. Dan managed to get the clerk of the House of Representatives to put up a list of the state applications so that you can see yourself that officially this is going to happen. And I think if you Google House Convention Memorial, it'll take you right to the House webpage listing.
And it does show Colorado's one, which was, I think, submitted in 1978. So is there a time frame, just in the last moment, there's no expiration date then? If a state submitted one, I think you mentioned Wisconsin back in the 1920s, there's no expiration on that. Do they have to formally rescind that if that's what they choose to do?
Not in the Constitution. There are rescissions listed on that official list, but in Article V there is nothing about rescission.
Well, there's a lot more information at those websites, articlev.org and foabc.org. Evan Rabbit, you said the best way to connect as well is through the Facebook page, Article V?
Yes.
Okay. Evan Rabbit, Dan Marks, and Bill Walker, thank you all so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's just past 9:30. You're listening to Community Radio KGNU. Stay tuned. The Morning Sound Alternative is next.